The highway at night is where America's darkest secrets hide. 11 drivers thought they were alone on empty roads until something proved them wrong. What you're about to hear happened in the dead zones between cities, where your phone loses signal and the only light comes from your headlights cutting through absolute darkness. These are the moments when the road becomes predatory, when the thing at your window shouldn't exist, when turning back isn't an option anymore. If you've ever felt that primal dread while driving alone at night, you'll understand why these encounters change these people forever. So lock your doors, because we're about to travel into the spaces where civilization ends and something else begins. And if this ignites that electric fear inside you, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're facing these terrors together, one dark road at a time. What would you do if the hitchhiker you picked up suddenly went silent and you realized they weren't breathing? I never pick up hitchhikers. That's the rule I've lived by for 15 years of driving, ever since my father sat me down and explained all the ways the world can hurt you when you're too trusting. But that night on Highway 101, somewhere between Port Angeles and Forks, the rain was coming down so hard I could barely see 10 feet ahead. And there she was, standing under a broken streetlight with her thumb out, soaked to the bone. She looked young, maybe early 20s, wearing a thin jacket that offered no protection against the October storm. I told myself I'd just drop her at the next town. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. She climbed in without a word, dripping water onto my passenger seat, her dark hair plastered to her face. I cranked up the heat and handed her the emergency blanket from my back seat. She took it with trembling hands and wrapped it around her shoulders, still silent. The only sounds were the rhythmic thump of the wipers and the rain hammering against the roof like 1,000 desperate fingers. I gave her space, focusing on the road, watching the yellow lines disappear and reappear in the wash of my headlights. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it over the storm. "Thank you for stopping. Most people don't anymore." There was something strange about the way she said it, like she was talking about a different era entirely. I glanced at her and managed to smile, trying to seem friendly and non-threatening. "Couldn't just leave you out there in this weather. Where are you headed?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared out the windshield at the wall of rain, her breath fogging the glass. "Away," she finally said. "I'm trying to get away from something." The way she emphasized that last word made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. "Away from what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. But my mind was already racing through possibilities, none of them good. Abusive boyfriend? Stalker? Something worse. She turned to look at me then, and I caught a glimpse of her face in the dashboard light. Her eyes were dark, impossibly dark, and there was a sadness in them that seemed too deep for someone so young. "From what I did," she whispered. "From what happened on this road." I felt a cold finger trace down my spine despite the heat blasting from the vents. "What do you mean? What happened?" She looked away again, back to the rain. "I was driving too fast. It was a night just like this, maybe worse. I was angry, not paying attention. There was a curve I didn't see coming, and then there were headlights, and then there was nothing. My mouth went dry. I wanted to ask more questions, but something told me to just listen, to let her talk. I don't know how long I was out there," she continued, her voice taking on a distant quality, like she was reciting something from memory. "In the rain, in the dark. I kept trying to flag down cars, but they wouldn't stop. They'd slow down, look right at me, and then speed up like they'd seen something terrible. I couldn't understand it. I just needed help. I just needed someone to stop. The heater was going full blast, but suddenly I felt cold. Really cold. I looked at the passenger seat, at the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and I realized something that made my blood freeze. The blanket wasn't wet, not even damp. And the water she'd brought in when she entered the car, it wasn't there anymore. The seat was completely dry. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice barely steady. She smiled then, sad and knowing. "Emily Thornton. But you already know that, don't you? You're starting to figure it out." I didn't know that name. I didn't think I did. But even as I denied it, something was clicking in the back of my mind. A news story from years ago, something I'd half heard on the radio while driving this same stretch of highway. A girl, a car accident, a rainy night. "That was 8 years ago," she said softly, answering the question I hadn't asked. "October 15th, 2017. I was 22. I was going home to apologize to my parents for a stupid fight we'd had. I never made it. I should have been terrified. I should have stopped the car, thrown open the door, run screaming into the rain. But I wasn't scared. Not exactly. What I felt was something stranger. A deep melancholy mixed with a creeping understanding that I was experiencing something impossible. Something that existed in the thin space between the world I knew and whatever comes after. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Why are you here? Why did I see you tonight?" Emily turned to face me fully, and I could see right through her now, could see the headrest behind her translucent form. "Because you're about to make the same mistake I did. 2 miles ahead, there's a curve. You won't see it in this rain. There's a truck coming the other way, and the driver fell asleep 5 minutes ago. If you're going this speed when you hit that curve, you'll cross the center line at the exact moment he drifts into your lane. You'll die. And maybe, like me, you'll spend years trying to warn someone else." My heart was hammering now, adrenaline flooding my system. I looked at the speedometer. 60 miles an hour, too fast for these conditions. I'd been too focused on the conversation, on the impossible thing sitting next to me, and I'd let my speed creep up. I eased off the gas, slowing to 45, then 40. "How do you know this?" I asked. But even as the words left my mouth, she was fading. "Because I've watched it happen 7 times, she said, her voice growing distant. 7 people who didn't stop for me. 7 people who died on that curve. I couldn't save them, but you stopped. You showed kindness to a stranger, so I can save you." She was almost completely gone now. Just a shimmer in the passenger seat, a suggestion of a human form. "Slow down more," she whispered. 35. Stay at 35. And when you see the curve, hug the right side. Don't overcorrect. Just breathe and hold steady." Then she was gone completely, and I was alone in the car with the rain and my thundering heartbeat. I slowed to 35, my hands shaking on the wheel, my eyes straining to see through the downpour. Every instinct screamed that this was crazy, that I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing, that ghosts weren't real and dead girls didn't hitchhike on rainy highways. And then I saw it. The curve, emerging from the darkness almost too late. A sharp bend to the left that I wouldn't have been able to handle at 60. I eased into it, staying right like she'd told me. And that's when the truck appeared. It was drifting, swaying across the center line, its driver slumped over the wheel. If I'd been going faster, if I'd been where I should have been 3 seconds earlier, we would have met head-on in a scream of metal and glass. Instead, the truck's mirror clipped my driver's side mirror with a crack. And then it was past me, and I was through the curve, and I was alive. I pulled over as soon as I found a wide spot, my whole body shaking. I grabbed my phone and called 911, reporting the truck, praying they'd reach him before he hurt himself or someone else. And then I just sat there in the dark, listening to the rain, trying to process what had happened. That's when I saw it, lying on the passenger seat where Emily had been sitting. A small silver bracelet with a tiny engraved charm. I picked it up with trembling fingers and held it under the dome light. The inscription read, "To Emily, never stop fighting. Love Mom and Dad, 2017. I still have that bracelet. It sits on my dashboard now, a reminder that the world is stranger and more merciful than I ever imagined. I looked up Emily Thornton when I got home that night. Found her obituary, her parents' names, the details of the accident that matched everything she'd told me. The next day, I drove to the cemetery listed in her memorial page and left the bracelet on her grave. When I came back a week later to leave flowers, the bracelet was gone. Sometimes, on rainy nights when I'm driving Highway 101, I look for her. I never see her anymore. But I hope that wherever Emily Thornton is now, she's finally found her way home. And I hope she knows that her kindness, her warning, didn't just save my life. It changed it. Now I stop for hitchhikers on rainy nights. Because you never know when a stranger might be an angel, or when an angel might be a stranger who just needs someone to stop. Have you ever noticed a road sign that shouldn't exist? I'm a long-haul trucker. Been driving for 23 years, crossed every major highway in America at least a dozen times. I know these roads better than I know my own neighborhood. I can tell you which rest stops have the best coffee, which way stations are strictest, which stretches of asphalt will cook your tires in summer. I've seen weird things out here, sure. Dust devils that look like dancers. Mirages that shimmer like water. Once saw ball lightning roll across the road in New Mexico. But what happened on Interstate 40 outside Flagstaff last July, that wasn't weather phenomena or tired eyes playing tricks. That was something else entirely, and I'm still not convinced I made it back. It was high noon, temperature pushing 110. The kind of heat that makes the air thick and makes your brain feel like it's cooking inside your skull. I'd been driving since dawn, hauling refrigerated goods from Albuquerque to Los Angeles, and I was making good time. The highway was nearly empty, just me and the endless ribbon of black asphalt cutting through red desert. That's when I saw the mile marker, mile 66. Nothing unusual about that, except I'd just passed mile marker 198 about 30 seconds earlier. I blinked hard, thinking the heat was getting to me, but there it was, clear as day. Mile 66. Green sign with white letters, standard issue highway marker, absolutely impossible. I checked my GPS. It showed me exactly where I should be, between mile markers 198 and 199. But the sign said 66. I've got a dash cam, records everything, and I glanced at it to make sure it was running. Whatever this was, I wanted proof. The logical part of my brain was offering explanations. Old sign that hadn't been removed. Some kind of construction reroute I'd missed. But I hadn't turned off the highway. There'd been no exit, no junction, no deviation whatsoever. I'd been driving straight on I-40 and somehow the mile markers had jumped backward by over 100 miles. Then I saw the gas station. It rose out of the desert about a quarter-mile ahead, shimmering in the heat waves. But it was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The design was old, 1950s-era Googie architecture with swooping lines and bright turquoise paint. The sign said, Desert Rose Station, in pink neon script. But neon doesn't glow in broad daylight. Except this did. It pulsed softly, impossibly, under the brutal Arizona sun. I felt my foot ease off the gas without consciously deciding to slow down. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but something else, curiosity maybe, or the creeping realization that something was very wrong with reality, made me signal and pull off. The gas pumps were ancient, the kind with the rolling numbers and the bell that dings when you drive over the hose. The prices made my stomach drop. 29 cents a gallon. The concrete was cracked, but not weathered, like it had been poured decades ago and then frozen in time. My truck's engine ticked in the silence as I climbed down from the cab. The heat should have hit me like a wall, but the air was comfortable, maybe 75 degrees. That's when I noticed my phone had no signal, not just no bars. The screen showed no network available, like cellular technology had never been invented. The station door was propped open, and I could hear music drifting out. Big band music, the kind my grandfather used to play. I walked inside and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The interior was pristine, a perfect snapshot of 1950s Americana. Chrome stools at a soda fountain, a rotating pie case with perfect meringues, a jukebox in the corner playing Glenn Miller. And sitting at the counter were 4 people who looked just as confused and terrified as I felt. The woman closest to me was wearing modern yoga clothes, her hair in a messy bun, mascara smeared like she'd been crying. Next to her was a businessman in a suit, his tie loosened, his phone lying dead on the counter in front of him. Further down sat a young couple in hiking gear, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. They all turned to look at me when I entered, and the relief in their eyes was almost worse than fear would have been. "You saw the mile marker?" the businessman said. It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly. "Mile 66. But that's impossible. I was at 198. "We all saw it," the yoga woman said, her voice shaky. "I've been here for 3 hours. I pulled in thinking I'd use the restroom and get directions. But there's no one here. No attendant, no other cars. And when I try to leave, I just end up back here." The young guy from the couple spoke up, his voice cracking. "We've been here since yesterday. At least, we think it's been a day. The sun hasn't moved. Look outside. Look at the angle. It's been high noon since we arrived." I looked. He was right. The sun was frozen at its zenith, casting short, harsh shadows that didn't shift or change. My mouth went dry. "This isn't possible," I said, but the words felt hollow. The businessman laughed, a bitter sound. "That's what we all said. But here we are, stuck at the desert road station that shouldn't exist, on a highway that doesn't go through here, watching the clock on the wall tick forward while time outside stands completely still." I looked at the clock. It was a Coca-Cola branded piece with red numbers. It read 12:47 p.m. My watch said the same. But when I'd pulled in, it had been 12:15. I'd only been inside maybe 5 minutes. "The clock's wrong too," the yoga woman said, following my gaze. "It jumps, goes forward in weird intervals. Sometimes 5 minutes pass in 1 minute. Sometimes an hour passes, and it only moves ahead 30 seconds. Time doesn't work right here." We spent the next while, I don't even know how long, comparing stories. The businessman had been driving from Phoenix to Vegas. The couple had been on their way to the Grand Canyon. The yoga woman had been headed to a retreat in Sedona. All of us had been on I-40. All of us had seen mile marker 66. All of us had felt compelled to stop at the desert road station. And all of us had tried to leave and found ourselves looping back, like the road outside formed an impossible circle that always returned here. The young woman from the couple started crying. We're going to die here, aren't we? We're going to be stuck forever." Her boyfriend tried to comfort her, but his own hands were shaking. I walked to the window and stared out at the desert. The landscape looked normal enough. Red rocks, scrub brush, empty highway. But it felt like a painting, flat and lifeless. And then I saw it, so subtle I almost missed it. The shadows were wrong. They were pointing slightly north when they should have been pointing south. Like the sun was in the wrong place, or like we were in the wrong place. "What if we all leave at once?" I suggested. "Everyone get in your vehicles and we drive out together. Maybe whatever this is, it can't hold all of us." It was a desperate idea, but desperation was all we had left. They agreed immediately, all of us grabbing our keys, heading for the door. That's when the jukebox changed songs. The cheerful big band music cut off abruptly and was replaced by something older. Scratchy, a woman singing in a language I didn't recognize. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant, and the clock started spinning backward, hands whirling counterclockwise in a blur. We ran. I don't remember making the decision. We just all bolted for the door at once. I reached my truck first, fired up the engine, and floored it out of the parking lot. The others were right behind me in their vehicles. I didn't look back, just focused on the highway ahead, on getting as far from that place as possible. The mile markers started appearing again. Mile 67, mile 68, mile 69. They were counting up, but slowly, too slowly. I pushed the accelerator down, watching my speedometer climb to 80, 90, 100. The desert blurred past. And then, like passing through a membrane, everything snapped back to normal. The temperature spiked. My phone erupted with notification sounds as signal returned. The GPS recalculated, showing me exactly where I should be. Mile marker 199. I'd somehow jumped from 69 to 199 in the span of a second. I pulled over, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. The other vehicles pulled over behind me. We all got out and stood there in the real heat, the real Arizona sun, just breathing and confirming with each other that we'd made it back. The businessman checked his phone. "We've been gone for 6 hours, he said, his face pale. 6 hours in that place, but out here, only 10 minutes passed. We exchanged information, promised to stay in touch, to verify this had really happened. Then we got back in our vehicles and drove away, none of us wanting to stay on that stretch of highway any longer than necessary. I've never seen those people again. I've called the numbers they gave me, but they're all disconnected. I've searched their names online and found nothing. Sometimes I wonder if they made it back at all, or if what returned was something else wearing their faces. I still drive I-40. I have to, it's my route. But I keep my speed steady and my eyes locked forward, and I never, ever stop between mile markers 195 and 200. Because somewhere out there, the desert Rose Station is still waiting, still glowing with impossible neon, still trapping travelers in a pocket of broken time. And I'm terrified that one day I'll see that sign again. Mile 66. The mile marker that doesn't exist on the highway that never ends. What if the shapes moving in the fog weren't people at all? I left Boston at 4 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. Couldn't stand being in that apartment another second with all of Sarah's things still in boxes by the door, waiting for her brother to pick them up. 3 years together, gone in one conversation, and I just needed to drive. Needed to clear my head. So I pointed my car north toward Bar Harbor, figuring I'd watch the sunrise over the Atlantic and maybe find some clarity in the ocean air. I didn't know that fog rolled in off the Maine coast at dawn like a living thing. I didn't know that some things use the fog to move between their world and ours. The highway hugged the coastline, twisting and turning with the rocky shore somewhere off to my right, invisible in the darkness. I had the road to myself. Hadn't seen another car in 40 minutes. The radio was playing some late-night talk show, conspiracy theories about government surveillance. The host's voice, the only company I had. That's when the fog started. It didn't roll in gradually, like normal fog. 1 second the road was clear, my headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. And the next second, I was driving through a wall of gray so thick I couldn't see the hood of my own car. I slowed down immediately, my hands gripping the wheel tighter, my heart rate kicking up a notch. The fog pressed against the windshield like something solid, like I was driving underwater. I could barely make out the yellow center line, and even that kept disappearing and reappearing in pulses. The speed limit sign said 55, but I was doing maybe 20, terrified I'd miss a curve and end up sailing off a cliff into the Atlantic. That's when I saw the first figure. It was walking alongside my car, keeping pace with me on the shoulder. At first, I thought it was a jogger, someone crazy enough to be out running in this soup. But the proportions were wrong. Too tall, arms too long. The gait was off, stilted, like something imitating walking without quite understanding how joints work. I couldn't see details through the fog, just a dark shape moving parallel to me, matching my speed exactly. My logical brain tried to rationalize it. Just someone walking. A trick of the fog making them look distorted. Nothing to worry about. But my lizard brain, the ancient part that kept our ancestors alive on the savannah, was screaming danger. I pressed the gas pedal down, speeding up to 30, then 35. The figure kept pace. I watched it in my peripheral vision, not wanting to take my eyes off the road, but unable to stop tracking its movement. Then the radio started acting up. The talk show host's voice turned garbled, words playing backward, and underneath it, I could hear other voices. Dozens of them, all speaking in reverse, creating this awful cacophony that made my teeth ache. I reached to turn it off, but my hand froze halfway there because now there were more figures. They emerged from the fog on both sides of the road. Tall and wrong, all walking in the same direction I was driving, all keeping perfect pace with my car. 5, 10, maybe 15 of them, spaced evenly like soldiers on a march. I could see them better now and wished I couldn't. They were too pale, skin the color of fog itself, and they moved with this horrible fluid motion that human bodies shouldn't be capable of. Their heads turned toward my car in unison, and though I couldn't see their faces clearly, I felt their attention lock onto me like a physical weight. My breath was coming in short gasps now, panic clawing at my chest. I wanted to floor it, wanted to blow past these things at 90 miles an hour. But the fog was so dense, I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. One wrong move, and I'd crash, and the thought of being stuck out here with those things made my blood run cold. So I maintained my speed, hands shaking on the wheel, watching the figures keep pace. And that's when they started getting closer. They moved toward the car, slowly, deliberately, closing the distance between the shoulder and the road. The nearest one was close enough now that I could see its hand, and calling it a hand was generous. It had too many fingers, too many joints, each digit ending in something that wasn't quite a fingernail and wasn't quite a claw. The radio voices were getting louder, more insistent, a chattering reversed chorus that felt like it was coming from inside my head rather than the speakers. I slapped the power button and the radio went silent. But the voices didn't stop. They just got clearer, and I realized with mounting horror that they were coming from outside the car. The figures were speaking, their mouths moving in those pale faces, words spilling out backward and wrong. It sounded like a recording played in reverse, phonemes that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. And they were right next to my car now, walking inches from my windows, their two long arms swinging, their wrong-jointed hands reaching out. One of them touched my driver's side window and I screamed. I actually screamed like a child because the hand that pressed against the glass was translucent, and I could see the fog swirling inside it like it was hollow. The touch left a mark, a handprint that steamed on the glass, and the smell hit me, seeping through the car's ventilation system. It smelled like the ocean, but wrong. Like dead things rotting in tidal pools, like salt and decay and something else I had no name for. More hands pressed against the windows, the windshield, even the roof of my car. I could hear the wet slap of them making contact. Could see dozens of handprints blooming across every surface. The reversed voices were deafening now, drilling into my skull, and I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but keep my foot on the gas and pray. Then one of them was in front of my car. I don't know how it got there, whether it moved impossibly fast or just materialized. But it was standing directly in my path, facing me. I got my first clear look at one of these things, and my mind tried to reject what I was seeing. Its face was smooth where it should have had features, just shallow depressions where eyes and a mouth should be. And those depressions were filled with roiling fog. Its body was humanoid, but the proportions were nightmare fuel, limbs that bent in too many places, a torso that seemed to ripple and shift like it couldn't quite maintain a solid form. I jerked the wheel to the right, swerving around it, my tires leaving the pavement and hitting the shoulder. Gravel sprayed against the undercarriage, and I wrestled the car back onto the road, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. In my rearview mirror, I could see the figure standing in the road, motionless now, surrounded by the others who had stopped walking and were all facing my car, all watching me flee. The handprints on my windows were starting to glow faintly, pulsing with a sickly green luminescence. I drove. I drove like hell itself was chasing me, pushing my speed up to 40, 45. Straining my eyes to see through the fog, taking curves on faith and prayer. The figures were gone, but the handprints remained, glowing brighter with each passing minute. And I had this terrible certainty that they were marks, that these things had tagged me somehow, and that the fog would never fully let me go. The reversed voices faded slowly, reluctantly, like they were being dragged away, rather than leaving willingly. Time lost all meaning. I could have been driving for 10 minutes or 2 hours. My phone was useless, the screen frozen on 5:47 a.m., the GPS showing nothing but gray static. The fog never thinned, never wavered, just maintained that suffocating density that turned the world into a claustrophobic tube of gray with my car at the center. I started seeing landmarks I recognized, a particular curve, a mile marker, a speed limit sign, and with creeping dread, I realized I was seeing the same landmarks, over and over. I'd pass the sign for Scenic Overlook 2 miles, and then 5 minutes later, I'd pass it again. I was driving in circles. The panic that had been simmering in my chest exploded into full terror. I was trapped, caught in some kind of loop with those things lurking in the fog, marked with their glowing handprints, driving the same stretch of highway over and over, while the sun never rose and time stood still. I wanted to stop, wanted to break down crying, wanted to call someone, anyone. But my phone was dead, and stopping felt like giving up, like surrendering to whatever those things wanted from me. So I kept driving, and I started talking to myself. narrating everything I saw, using my own voice as an anchor to sanity. Yellow line, curve ahead, speed limit 55. Fog still thick. Handprints still glowing. Road looks the same. Trees on the left. Ocean on the right somewhere. Scenic overlook 2 miles. Yellow line. Curve ahead. Over and over. A litany against the madness. Proof I was still myself. Still human. Still real. And then, so suddenly, it was like someone flipped a switch. The fog was gone. Just completely, instantly gone. I was driving on Route 1 in full dawn light, the sun breaking over the Atlantic in shades of pink and gold. Other cars appearing around me like they'd always been there. The handprints vanished from my windows as if they'd never existed. My phone chimed with a dozen notifications, time and GPS snapping back to normal. 6:23 a.m. I'd lost 36 minutes. I pulled into the first parking lot I saw, a scenic overlook ironically, and sat there shaking, my hands still locked on the wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked at my windows, searching for any trace of the handprints, but the glass was clean. Perfectly, impossibly clean, like it had just been washed. But the smell lingered, that rot and salt and wrongness, faint but unmistakable. It took me 3 hours before I could start driving again, and I went south, back to Boston, back to my apartment with Sarah's boxes and my broken heart. I never made it to Bar Harbor, never watched that sunrise I'd been seeking. I've never driven Route 1 in Maine again, never want to see that coastline or smell that ocean air. Because now I know what moves in the fog, what walks alongside cars in the early morning when the barrier between worlds grows thin. And sometimes, on foggy nights in Boston, I wake up to the smell of rotting tidal pools and see faint handprints on my bedroom window, glowing softly in the darkness, reminding me that some things don't let go even after you escape. The fog found me once, marked me, and I think it's still looking, still waiting for another chance to pull me back into that gray prison where time loops and things with too many fingers press their hands against the glass. What's the worst discovery you could make when you stop to help a stranded driver? The heat was biblical. That's the only way to describe West Texas in August, when the thermometer pushes past 115 and the asphalt starts to bubble. I was driving back from El Paso to San Antonio, a straight shot across nothing but scrubland and sky, when I saw the car on the shoulder. Silver sedan, hood up, hazards blinking weakly in the punishing sunlight. No one visible around it. I'm not a good Samaritan by nature. I mind my business, keep my head down, get where I'm going. But out here, leaving someone stranded isn't just rude, it's potentially fatal. People die in this heat, die fast. So I slowed down, checked my mirrors, and pulled over about 20 yards behind the sedan. The silence hit me first when I turned off my engine. No wind, no birds. Just this oppressive dead quiet broken only by the tick of cooling metal. I grabbed my water bottle and stepped out into air so hot it felt solid, like walking into an oven. The sedan's driver door was closed, but not latched, hanging open maybe an inch. The hood was indeed up, propped on its support rod. I walked closer, calling out, "Hey, you need help? Anyone here?" Nothing. The car was a rental based on the barcode sticker on the back window. I peered through the open door. Keys in the ignition. Engine still running. The AC was blasting cold air into the empty interior. Purse on the passenger seat, phone in the cup holder, half-drunk iced coffee sweating in the holder next to it. Everything about this screamed wrong. People don't leave their car running with the keys in it. Don't leave their valuables behind. Don't just vanish into the desert. I looked around. scanning the landscape for any sign of someone walking, maybe heading toward a structure or searching for cell signal. But there was nothing out here. Just flat scrubland stretching to the horizon in every direction, heat shimmer turning the distance into liquid. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. My voice died in the dead air, swallowed by the heat and emptiness. That's when I heard it. A thump from the trunk, soft but distinct. Then silence. Then another thump, followed by what might have been scratching. My first thought was animal, coyote or javelina that somehow got trapped inside. But the trunk was closed, latched properly. How would an animal get in there and close it behind itself? The thumping came again, more insistent, and now I could hear something else. A muffled sound that could have been whimpering, could have been human. My hand was reaching for my phone to call 911 before I consciously decided to move. No signal. Of course, no signal. I was in the dead zone, the stretch where civilization gave up and the desert took over. The thumping was continuous now, frantic. Someone was in that trunk. Someone needed help. I looked at the car, at the open driver's door with the keys right there in the ignition. Modern. Cars, you can pop the trunk from inside. There's a release button. But this person was in the trunk, meaning they either couldn't reach it or it wasn't working. I moved to the driver's door and reached inside, feeling for the trunk release. My fingers found it, a small lever near the floor by the seat. I pulled it and heard the mechanism click. The trunk popped open an inch with a pneumatic hiss. And that's when the smell hit me. Not the smell of a person trapped in a hot trunk. Something else. Copper and meat and wrongness. I stepped back involuntarily, my brain trying to process the scent, trying to reconcile it with the thumping sounds that had now stopped completely. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away, to leave this situation for highway patrol or anyone with a badge and a gun. But what if someone was hurt in there? What if they were dying and I was their only chance? I forced myself forward, grabbed the edge of the trunk lid, and lifted it fully open. Then I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. The trunk was lined with plastic sheeting. Industrial clear plastic, the kind used at construction sites, carefully taped to cover every surface. And there was blood. Fresh blood pooled in the lowest point where the plastic sagged. But no body, no injured person. Instead, there was a laptop propped open, screen glowing, and a small speaker. The speaker was playing a recording, thumping sounds, scratching, whimpering, on loop. The laptop screen showed a video feed, and with dawning horror, I realized it was showing me. Live. Right now. Standing there, staring into the trunk. I spun around, searching for the camera, and found it mounted on the inside of the raised hood, pointed directly at where I stood. This was a setup. A trap. But for what? The answer came from behind me, from the direction of my own car. Pretty fucked up, right? The voice was casual, almost friendly. I turned to see a man leaning against my driver's door, 30s, average height, wearing dusty jeans and a faded t-shirt. He had a pleasant face, the kind you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. And he was holding my car keys, dangling them from one finger. You stopped. Most people don't anymore. Getting too smart, I guess. Too suspicious. But you're old school. Good Samaritan type. My mouth was dry, heart hammering. I calculated the distance between us. 20 yards. He was blocking my car. The empty highway stretched behind him. Who are you? What is this? He smiled, and it was wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. I'm someone who's adapted, evolved. Used to be, you could just grab people, snatch them off the street, overpower them, throw them in a van. But cameras are everywhere now. Witnesses, too risky. So you make them come to you, make them stop, make them open the trunk themselves. The blood drained from my face. The blood. Whose blood is that? He shrugged. Previous participant. She was helpful. 2. Saw the abandoned car, stopped to check, opened the trunk. Gave me a good 2 hours before the screaming got too annoying. You'll last longer, though. You look fit, strong. That's good. I appreciate quality. He started walking toward me, casual and unhurried. I backed away, my mind racing through options. Run into the desert? He'd track me down within an hour, and I'd be exhausted and dehydrated. Fight? He probably had weapons, definitely had experience. Scream? For who? We hadn't seen another car in 30 minutes. Don't make this difficult, he said, his voice still friendly, like we were negotiating a business deal. The car's staged half a mile ahead. If you run, you'll just die tired. If you fight, you'll just die hurt. But if you cooperate, get in my truck nice and easy, this can be quick. Relatively painless. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the casual way he discussed murder. Maybe it was seeing my own death in his eyes and refusing to accept it. I bolted, not into the desert like he expected, but toward him, toward my car. The move surprised him enough that I got within 10 feet before he reacted. He lunged, grabbing for my arm, but I twisted away, my hand closing around the only weapon I had, my water bottle. I swung it hard, catching him across the temple. The impact knocked him sideways, and I didn't stop, didn't think, just jumped for my car door. He recovered faster than should have been possible, his hand catching my ankle, yanking hard. I went down on the asphalt, the heat searing through my clothes, gravel tearing my palms. He dragged me backward, and I kicked, my heel connecting with something soft. He grunted, his grip loosening, and I scrambled forward, half crawling, half running. My keys were on the ground, where he dropped them. I grabbed them, feeling his hand close around my leg again, and drove the key into the back of his hand as hard as I could. He screamed, really screamed, and let go. I threw myself into my driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition with shaking hands. The engine turned over just as he reached the door. I floored it, tires spinning on gravel, the car fishtailing as I pulled onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the road, watching me go, his hand bleeding, his face calm. Not angry, not frustrated, just calculating. Like this was a minor setback in a process he'd perfected. I drove 90 miles before I saw another car. Drove until I hit a town with a police station and cell service. The cops were skeptical at first. Thought maybe I'd had heat stroke, hallucinated the whole thing. But they sent units to the location I described. They found the silver sedan, found the plastic-lined trunk, the blood, the camera equipment, the recording device. What they didn't find was him. No truck, no trace. Like he'd evaporated into the desert heat. The blood in the trunk matched a woman reported missing 3 weeks earlier. Tourist from Ohio who'd been driving across Texas and never made it to her destination. They found 2 more setups in the following weeks, abandoned cars staged on lonely stretches of highway across 3 states. Cameras, speakers, plastic sheeting, evidence of at least 7 victims who'd stopped to help. 7 good Samaritans who'd opened that trunk and never driven away. I testified at hearings, worked with sketch artists. My description went national. But he was never caught. Maybe he changed his methods. Maybe he moved to a different region. Maybe he's still out there, setting up his traps on empty roads, waiting for someone kind enough to stop. The cops told me I was lucky. Told me most people who encounter someone like that don't walk away. But I don't feel lucky. I feel guilty. Because now when I see a car broken down on the highway, I don't stop. I call it in and keep driving. And I wonder how many people are trapped in trunks, real people, not recordings, dying in the heat while drivers like me pass by because we've learned that kindness is dangerous. I still drive that route sometimes. My job requires it. But I drive it fast, doors locked, windows up, and I don't look at the shoulders where cars might be waiting. Because I know the truth now. The highway isn't just dangerous because of accidents or weather. It's dangerous because predators have learned to use our better nature against us. They've learned that the easiest way to catch prey is to make the prey think they're the rescuer. And somewhere out there, on a sun-baked stretch of Texas highway, there's an abandoned car with its hood up and hazards blinking, waiting for the next person who still believes in helping strangers. I hope whoever that is runs faster than I did. Would you trust a complete stranger telling you to turn around and never look back? I was 22 and stupid, driving from Denver to Seattle because my ex-boyfriend posted pictures with his new girlfriend, and I needed to prove I was fine, that I was thriving, that I could just pack up and have an adventure without him. Classic post-breakup decision-making. It was past midnight on Interstate 80 in Wyoming, that stretch where there's nothing but darkness and wind and the occasional truck stop every 70 miles. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, fueled by energy drinks and spite, when my CB radio crackled to life. I'd installed the CB as a joke, thought it would be fun to listen to truckers talk, maybe feel less alone on the long drives. But it had been silent for hours until that moment. Southbound four-wheeler approaching Little Springs, you need to turn around right now. The voice was male, urgent, with that distinct trucker drawl. I grabbed the handset, confused. This is southbound, but I'm heading west on 80. You got the wrong person? Static. Then, blue Honda Civic, license plate starts with 4G7. That you? My blood went cold. I looked at my license plate in the rear view, though I knew what it said. 4G7K2L. How do you know my car? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Because I'm watching you right now, and you need to listen very carefully. Take the next exit, turn around, go back east. Do not, under any circumstances, continue to Little Springs. I scanned the darkness around me, finally spotting running lights in the distance behind me. A semi far back, but maintaining distance. Who are you? Why are you following me? The radio crackled with what might have been a sigh. Name's Marcus. I'm not following you. I'm trying to save your life. There's 3 more of us behind me. We've all been on this route tonight. And we're all trying to stop you from making a very bad mistake. This felt like a prank. Like some elaborate joke, or worse, some creepy trucker trying to scare a woman traveling alone. Yeah, I'm not taking directions from random strangers on the CB. Thanks anyway. I went to hang up the handset, but his next word stopped me. The exit for Little Springs is in 4 miles. The town looks normal. Gas stations open, diners got lights on. You'll see maybe a dozen cars parked along Main Street. It looks safe. It looks welcoming. But everyone in that town is waiting for travelers, and they don't let them leave. Right. Sure. And what, they sacrifice people to corn gods or something? I was trying to sound tough, but my hand was shaking. A new voice came through, older, gravelly. This ain't a joke, young lady. We're all independent drivers. We don't know each other, but we've all learned to avoid Little Springs between midnight and dawn. Lost a friend 2 years ago. He stopped for gas, and we never heard from him again. Cops found his rig a week later, parked behind the diner, empty. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just empty. A third voice joined, female this time, and somehow that made it more real. I stopped there once, about 4 years back. Something felt wrong immediately. Everyone was too friendly, too interested in where I was going, where I was from. And they kept asking if I was alone. When I tried to leave, I found my tires slashed, all 18 of them. Had to call for help, waited until sunrise with my doors locked and my gun loaded. Soon as the sun came up, everyone acted like they didn't know what I was talking about. New tires appeared, already mounted. They smiled and waved as I left. The first voice, Marcus, came back. Exits in 2 miles. We're all getting off here, turning around. We can convoy you back east to the last real town. Make sure you're safe. Or you can keep going, find out for yourself. But I'm telling you, I've driven this route for 15 years, and I don't go through Little Springs at night. None of us do. I looked at my GPS. Little Springs wasn't even on it, just a blank spot on the map between 2 larger dots. The exit sign appeared in my headlights. Little Springs, 1 mile. My rational brain was fighting with the primal fear crawling up my spine. This was America, modern America. Towns didn't just kidnap travelers. That was movie stuff, urban legend material. But 4 different truckers, all saying the same thing. What do they do? The people in Little Springs, what do they do to travelers? Silence on the radio. Long enough that I thought they'd given up on me. Then Marcus spoke, his voice lower, heavier. We don't know exactly. People disappear. Sometimes they're found later, miles away, wandering with no memory of where they've been. Sometimes they're never found at all. But twice a year, around the solstices, that town needs offerings, needs fresh blood for whatever they worship. And they take it from people no one will miss, solo travelers, people passing through. The exit ramp was right there. And despite everything, despite the fear and the warnings, part of me wanted to prove them wrong. Wanted to pull off, get gas, take a picture at that diner, and post it online showing how not scared I was. The same impulse that made me take this trip in the first place. That need to prove something. Last chance, the female voice said. We're taking the exit. You can follow us east, or you can go west into Little Springs. But choose now. I don't know what would have happened if I'd seen the town right then. If there had been lights visible or signs of normal civilization. But there was just darkness. Complete, total darkness, where Little Springs should have been. No glow of streetlights, no gas station signs, just a void in the landscape like the town had been erased. My foot moved from gas to brake without consulting my brain. I slowed down. The exit ramp passed. And then I saw them. Headlights, dozens of them. Coming from the direction of Little Springs, pouring onto the highway, vehicles of all types accelerating fast. Cars, trucks, even what looked like a school bus, all heading straight for me. My CB exploded with voices. Floor it! Go, go, go! They know you didn't take the exit. Don't let them box you in. I slammed the accelerator down, my little Civic's engine screaming as I pushed it to 80, 90, 100. The vehicles were gaining, moving impossibly fast. And in my rear view, I could see the semi-trucks that had been following me positioning themselves between my car and the pursuers. What happened next was pure chaos. The trucks formed a rolling barricade, blocking lanes, slowing down the pursuing vehicles while I ran. My CB was a constant stream of instructions. Stay in the left lane. Don't slow down. Next town is 40 miles. You need to make it there. I was crying, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white, pushing my car faster than I'd ever driven. The pursuing vehicles were relentless, trying to get around the truckers, but they held formation like they'd practiced this. One car got through, a black sedan that pulled alongside me. I could see people inside, their faces pressed against the windows, mouths moving in unison like they were chanting. The passenger window rolled down, and a hand reached out, trying to grab my door handle. I swerved right, nearly losing control, and one of the trucks swept in, forcing the sedan to back off. This went on for miles. 15, 20. The longest 20 miles of my life. And then I saw lights ahead. Real lights. A truck stop, brightly lit with normal people and normal cars. The pursuing vehicles slowed, then stopped, then turned around in perfect synchronization and headed back toward Little Springs. I made it to the truck stop and parked under the brightest light I could find, my whole body shaking. The 4 semis pulled in around me, forming a protective square. The truckers got out, and I finally saw them. Marcus was a big guy in his 50s with kind eyes. The older man was weathered and lean. The woman was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with military-style short hair. The fourth was a quiet man who just nodded. They bought me coffee and sat with me until sunrise, taking turns keeping watch. Marcus explained that they'd formed an informal network. Truckers who'd learned which towns to avoid, which stretches of highway got dangerous after dark. They monitored CB channels and helped travelers who didn't know better. Little Springs isn't the only place, he said. There are spots all over the country, towns that went wrong somewhere along the line, places where people made deals they shouldn't have. We just try to keep folks safe. I didn't continue west. I turned around, drove back to Denver, moved back in with my roommate, and went back to my boring job. My ex can post whatever pictures he wants. I've seen things that put relationship drama in perspective. I've been chased by a town full of people who wanted me for something I don't want to imagine. And I've learned that the American highway has dark spaces where normal rules don't apply, where communities have become something other than human, and where the only things standing between travelers and those dark spaces are people like Marcus and his friends. I never drive at night anymore, and I keep that CB radio on, volume high, because now I'm part of the network too, watching for solo travelers, warning them about Little Springs and places like it. The highway has teeth, but it also has guardians. You just have to know which voices to trust when they tell you to turn around. What would you do if you couldn't remember the last 3 days of your life? My name is David Chen, and I'm a pharmaceutical sales rep. I tell you this because I need you to understand I'm a normal person. Organized, detail-oriented. I keep meticulous records of my schedule, my mileage, my client meetings. So when I woke up in my car at a rest stop in the Colorado Rockies with absolutely no memory of how I got there, I knew something was catastrophically wrong. The last thing I remembered was leaving a client dinner in Denver on Tuesday night. My phone said it was Friday afternoon. 72 hours. Gone. I sat there in the driver's seat, trying to force my brain to fill in the gaps. But there was just nothing. A clean void where 3 days should have been. My car was parked neatly in a spot at the Mount Evans rest area, engine off, keys in my lap. I was wearing different clothes than I remembered putting on Tuesday. My suitcase in the back seat had been repacked, items folded in a way I never fold them. The gas tank was half empty. My laptop was open on the passenger seat, battery dead. When I plugged it in and booted it up, I found a document I didn't remember writing. Just one sentence, repeated hundreds of times. Don't drink the water, don't drink the water, don't drink the water. My hands started shaking. I checked my recent calls. Nothing unusual. Checked my emails. I'd sent several to clients, normal business correspondence, all dated during the missing days. I'd apparently been functioning, working, living normally, while having no actual consciousness of doing so. The most recent email was sent 4 hours ago from this very rest stop, confirming a Monday meeting. I had written it, my writing style, my sign-off, but I had zero memory of typing those words. I got out of the car on unsteady legs and looked around. The rest stop was nice, well-maintained, with modern facilities and informational plaques about the surrounding mountains. There were maybe a dozen other vehicles scattered across the parking lot. A family was having a picnic at one of the tables. An elderly couple was walking their dog. Everything looked aggressively normal, but something felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The light was too bright. The air tasted metallic, and everyone was moving just slightly too slow, like I was watching them at .95 playback speed. The rest stop building had bathrooms and a visitor center. I walked toward it, needing to splash water on my face, needing to ground myself in something real. That's when I saw the woman. She was standing by the water fountain inside, just staring at it, her hand hovering over the button but not pressing it. I walked past her to the men's room, and when I came out 5 minutes later, she was still standing there in the exact same position, hand hovering, staring. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I asked. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were wrong. The pupils were too dilated, black swallowing, up the color. And she blinked too slowly, like her eyelids were operating on a delay. "I don't remember coming here," she said, her voice flat and mechanical. "I was in Boulder. I was going to work. Now I'm here and my phone says it's been 2 days, but I don't remember. Do you remember?" The fear in her voice broke through the monotone, and I felt my own panic rising to match it. "No," I admitted. "I don't remember either. I lost 3 days." Her face crumpled and she grabbed my arm. "There are others. Inside the visitor center. 7 of us so far, all with missing time, all last remember being somewhere else. And we all have this feeling like we need to stay here, like leaving would be bad. But we don't know why we feel that way." She was squeezing my arm hard enough to hurt. "What's happening to us?" I followed her into the visitor center. 6 people were sitting on benches, all with that same wrong look in their eyes. 2 dilated pupils, slow movements, a young guy in hiking gear, a businessman, a woman with 2 kids who sat eerily still beside her, an older man in a trucker cap. They all turned to look at us when we entered, and I saw recognition and relief flash across their faces. "You too?" the businessman asked. "The missing time?" I nodded and sat down heavily on a bench. 3 days gone? Last memory is Tuesday night in Denver." The trucker spoke up, his voice gravelly. "I got 5 days missing. Last thing I knew I was in Kansas, heading to Omaha with a load. Now I'm here, my truck's parked outside empty, and I can't leave. Every time I try to walk to my truck, I forget where I'm going halfway there and end up back here." The woman with the kids was rocking back and forth. "My children won't talk. They haven't said a word since we woke up here 6 hours ago. They just sit and stare, and I can't get them to respond. What did we do? What happened during the time we lost?" The hiker pulled out his phone. "I've been documenting, taking pictures every few minutes, writing notes, because I noticed something. We're forgetting. Not just the big missing chunk, we're actively losing more time. I took this picture 2 hours ago according to the timestamp, but I don't remember taking it. He showed us a photo of himself holding a sign. If you're reading this, you've already forgotten writing this. You've been at the rest stop for 9 hours. Something in the water. Don't drink anything here. The pieces started clicking together. The document on my laptop. Don't drink the water. Had I written that during a moment of clarity during my missing days? Had I been trying to warn my future self? Did any of you drink from the fountain? I asked. Or fill water bottles here? They all nodded, slowly, reluctantly, like they were fighting to admit it. The businessman spoke. I was thirsty when I arrived. Drank straight from the fountain. Then everything gets fuzzy. I stood up and walked to the fountain, kneeling down to examine it. It looked normal. Standard rest, stop water fountain, metal and porcelain, the kind you see in thousands of public places. But when I looked closer at the drain, I saw something. A faint residue, almost oily, with a strange iridescence to it. And the smell, now that I was paying attention, was off. Not quite chemical, not quite organic. Something in between. Has anyone left successfully? I asked. Anyone managed to drive away? The trucker shook his head. A couple tried earlier, got about a mile down the road and turned around, came back. Said they felt like they forgot where they were going, forgot they were trying to leave. Like their GPS stopped working and their sense of direction just vanished. They're outside now, walking in circles, can't even remember their own names anymore. I looked out the window and saw them. 2 people, a man and a woman, walking slow loops around the parking lot, their movements synchronized, their faces blank. They'd lost more than memory. They'd lost themselves. Whatever was in that water, it was destroying cognition piece by piece, erasing identity and volition until there was nothing left but biological autopilot. We need to call for help, I said, reaching for my phone. Call 911, get hazmat teams here, warn people away. I dialed. The call connected. And then I realized I couldn't remember why I'd called. The emergency operator was asking what my emergency was, and I was standing there with the phone to my ear, unable to articulate what was wrong. The memory of the last few minutes was sliding away like water through my fingers. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't grasp what. The others were staring at me expectantly, but I didn't know why. I hung up and sat back down, a deep unease in my gut that I couldn't explain. Time moved strangely after that. I'd be sitting on the bench, and then suddenly I'd be outside by my car. I'd be reading a pamphlet about mountain wildlife. And then abruptly, I was in the bathroom staring at myself in the mirror, not recognizing my own face for a long moment before memory snapped back. The gaps were getting bigger. The forgetting was accelerating. And through it all, that persistent feeling that I needed to stay. That leaving was wrong. That this rest stop was where I belonged now. Night fell. Or maybe it was morning. I couldn't tell anymore. The other people were still there, or maybe they were different people. I wasn't sure. We sat together in the visitor center, our pupils so dilated our eyes looked black, our movements slow and synchronized. New cars pulled in, new people walked to the fountain, drank, and joined us in our forgetting. I tried to warn them, but the words wouldn't come. Tried to remember why they needed warning, but the reason slipped away. Somewhere in the back of my eroding mind, behind the fog and the forgetting, a small part of me was screaming, was fighting, was desperately trying to hold on to something, anything, that made me who I was. David Chen. Pharmaceutical, Sales rep. Organized. Detail-oriented. But even that was fading. The water had gotten into us, changed our brain chemistry, made us docile and empty. We were becoming something else. Something that just existed here, perpetually. Forgetting and forgetting until there was nothing left to forget. I don't know how long I've been here now. Could be days, could be months. Time doesn't work right anymore. But sometimes, in flashes of clarity that come less and less frequently, I remember. I remember having a life, having a name, having a purpose beyond sitting in this visitor center and watching new travelers arrive. And in those moments, I try to write warnings, try to leave messages. But I always forget before I can finish, always lose the thread, always end up back on the bench, staring at nothing, waiting for whatever comes next in this limbo of lost time and dissolving identity. If you're reading this somehow, if this account makes it out, avoid the Mount Evans rest area. Don't drink the water. And if you've already stopped there, already drank, then I'm sorry. Because soon you won't remember why you should be scared. Soon you won't remember anything at all. Just like me. Just like all of us who thought we'd only stopped for a moment and ended up staying forever. Why would children be playing a game in the middle of a highway at 3 in the morning? I drive for a medical courier service, transporting blood samples and organ donations between hospitals. It's not glamorous, but it pays well, especially the overnight shifts when you get hazard pay for the speed requirements. Time matters when you're carrying a liver to someone who'll die without it. That's what I was doing on Highway 182 through the Louisiana Bayou country, racing against a 4-hour window with a cooler full of transplant materials in my passenger seat when I saw the children. They were standing in a perfect line across both lanes. Maybe 8 or 9 of them, ranging from what looked like 6 years old to maybe 12. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, the kind you see in photographs from the 60s or 70s. Faded shorts and simple dresses, no shoes. And they were completely still, frozen in place like statues, facing my approaching headlights. I slammed on my brakes, my tires screaming against the asphalt, the cooler sliding forward and hitting the dashboard. I stopped maybe 10 feet from the nearest child. My heart was hammering. What the hell were kids doing out here? There was nothing around, just swamp on both sides of the road. Cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, dark water reflecting moonlight. No houses, no driveways. No reason for anyone to be here, let alone children in the middle of the night. I sat there with my hands gripping the wheel, waiting for them to move, to react, to do something. They didn't. They just stood there, perfectly motionless. And now that I was close, I could see their faces. Pale, expressionless, eyes open but not blinking. I honked my horn. Nothing. I rolled down my window and called out, "Hey, you kids need to get off the road. It's dangerous out here." My voice sounded too loud in the humid silence, and the moment I stopped talking, I heard it. The sounds of the bayou, frogs and crickets and things moving in the water. But underneath that, something else. Children laughing, distant, coming from the swamp on both sides. I looked away from the kids in the road toward the tree line, trying to locate the source of the laughter. And when I looked back at the road, one of the children had moved. The little girl who'd been on the far left was now 3 feet closer to my van. I hadn't seen her move, hadn't heard footsteps. She'd just changed position like a character in a video game, glitching from one spot to another. Her head was tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn, cocked too far to the side like her neck was broken. And she was smiling. Not a child's smile. Something wrong. Too wide, too knowing. I threw the van into reverse, but before I could hit the gas, a voice rang out from the group. "Red light." It was a child's voice, high and sing-song, but with an echo to it, like multiple voices speaking in unison. And just like that, I couldn't move. My foot was on the pedal, but it wouldn't press down. My hands were on the wheel, but they wouldn't turn it. I was frozen, locked in place by invisible hands, unable to do anything but sit there and watch as all 9 children turned their heads in perfect synchronization to look directly at me. "Green light," they said together. And suddenly, I could move again. I slammed the gear shift into reverse and floored it, the van shooting backward. I made it maybe 20 feet before that voice rang out again. "Red light." I froze. Engine still running, wheels still spinning uselessly, but my body was locked rigid. The children walked forward, still in their line, moving with that same eerie synchronization. Their feet didn't make sounds on the pavement. They glided more than walked. And as they got closer, I could see details I wished I couldn't. Their clothes were wet, soaked through. Water was dripping from their hair, running down their faces, pooling on the asphalt beneath them. And their skin had that waterlogged quality, bloated and pale, the way bodies look when they've been submerged too long. These weren't living children. These were drowned children. Dead things moving and talking and playing their terrible game. "Green light," they whispered, and I could move again. This time I didn't reverse. I threw the van into drive and gunned it straight at them, hating myself, but knowing I had to get through, had to complete my delivery, had to escape whatever this was. The van surged forward and the children scattered, but not like normal kids would. They moved too fast, blurring to the sides of the road, and their laughter erupted all around me, shrill and delighted. I thought I'd made it through, thought I was clear. But then I felt the impact. Soft, but definite. Something had gone under my wheels. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a small body lying in the road behind me. A little boy, maybe 7, his limbs at wrong angles. And then he sat up. Just sat straight up like someone had pulled him with strings, his head rotating a full 180 to look at me. And he smiled that too wide smile. "Red light," he said. And even though he was 50 feet behind me, I heard him clear as if he was sitting in my back seat. I froze again. The van stopped. And now they were everywhere. Faces pressed against my windows, small hands with wrinkled, waterlogged fingers splayed against the glass. They were climbing on the hood, on the roof. I could hear them up there, their wet feet squeaking against metal. The girl with the broken neck leaned down from the roof, hanging upside down in front of my windshield, her face inches from the glass. "You ran," she said, her voice sad and accusing. "Nobody's supposed to run. You have to play right, or we can't let you go." The children started chanting, all of them, a rhythmic sing-song that made my teeth ache. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good children go to heaven. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Bad ones drown and go to hell. Over and over, over, faster and faster, and the van started rocking as they pushed against it. Water was seeping in somehow, running down the inside of my windshield, pooling in the cup holders. The smell hit me, thick and rotten. Bayou water, stagnant and full of decay. "Green light," they all screamed together, and I could move. I grabbed my phone, no signal of course, grabbed the cooler, and kicked open my door. The children fell back like they'd been expecting this, forming a circle around the van. I stood there in the humid night air, holding the cooler against my chest like a shield. "What do you want?" My voice was shaking. What do I have to do? The boy I'd hit, the one who'd sat up wrong, walked forward. Up close, he was worse. I could see pondweed in his hair. Could see small fish that had been nibbling at him, still stuck in the folds of his wet clothes. Play, he said simply. Play the game right. Make it to the end of the road without moving on red light. If you win, you go free. If you lose, you stay with us forever. Those are the rules. Those have always been the rules. The other children parted, forming a pathway down the highway. In the distance, I could see a bridge, maybe half a mile away. That's the end? I asked. The boy nodded. That's where we died. Flash flood, 1973. The water came up so fast. We tried to make it across, but the current took us. We've been here ever since. Playing, waiting. Everyone who comes through has to play. I started walking. Slow steps, watching the children, waiting for the call. They followed on either side, matching my pace, their dead eyes tracking my every movement. 20 steps, 30. Red light. I froze mid-step, balanced on one foot, my muscles screaming. The children circled me, examining me like I was an exhibit. One reached out and touched the cooler. What's in there? She asked. Someone's second chance, I managed through clenched teeth. Someone who needs this or they die. The little girl tilted her head. We died. We didn't get second chances. We just got cold and dark and wet. There was such loneliness in her voice, such endless sorrow, that despite my terror, I felt something crack in my chest. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry you're stuck here. But someone's waiting for this. Someone's family is praying, please. Green light, she said softly, and I stumbled forward, regaining my balance. I walked faster now, my eyes fixed on that bridge. The children kept pace, kept playing their game, calling red and green in irregular intervals designed to throw me off, to make me stumble. Twice I nearly fell during red light, catching myself at the last second. Once I moved a fraction of an inch and they screamed. A sound so piercing it felt like nails in my eardrums, but they let it pass. The bridge was getting closer. 100 yards, 50, 20. The children were chanting again, excited and frantic. Almost there, almost free. Will you make it? Wait and see. My legs were shaking from the effort of stopping and starting, from the adrenaline flooding my system. 10 yards from the bridge. 5. Red light. I froze one last time. So close I could see the bridge's worn concrete, could see the water rushing underneath it, swollen and dark. The boy walked up beside me. You played well? You listened? You didn't cheat? He looked at the cooler. And you're carrying hope. We remember hope. We remember what it felt like to think we'd be saved. He turned to the other children. Let this one go. They nodded in unison, and I felt the weight lift, the invisible restraints vanish. Green light, the boy whispered. And don't come back. Next time we might not be so merciful. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. Hit the bridge and kept running, the cooler banging against my ribs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, the laughter faded, replaced by the sound of rushing water and my own footsteps. I didn't stop until I reached my van on the other side, didn't look back until I was inside with the doors locked and the engine running. The children were gone. The road was empty, like they'd never been there at all. I made the delivery with 40 minutes to spare. The transplant was successful. Someone lived because I played a dead children's game on a Louisiana highway and won. I reported the incident, tried to anyway. But there's no box on the courier company forms for detained by ghosts. I researched it later. Found news articles from August 1973. 9 children from a church youth group swept away when Bayou Teche overflowed during a freak storm. Bodies found weeks later. Their families buried them, but apparently their spirits never left the place they died. I don't drive that route anymore. I requested reassignment and took the pay cut that came with avoiding overnight bayou runs. Because I know the truth now. I know that Highway 182 belongs to those children after midnight. And they're still playing their game, still looking for people to join them in their eternal recreation of the last moments before the water took them under. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, faint and distant, like it's coming from very far away or from inside my own head. Children's voices, laughing and chanting. Red light, green light, red light, green light. A game that never ends on a road that remembers the dead. How would you react if your own reflection tried to save your life? I'm a software engineer, which means I spend most of my time thinking in logical loops and debugging problems that have rational solutions. Cause and effect. Input and output. Everything has an explanation if you look hard enough at the code. That mindset is probably why I stayed calm longer than most people would have when my reflection started showing me things that hadn't happened yet. Calm, at least, until I understood what my reflection was trying to tell me. That, in another version of tonight, I was already dead. I was driving through Nevada on Highway 95, one of those lonely stretches where you can go an hour without seeing another soul. I'd left a tech conference in Las Vegas early, too burned out on forced networking and vendor pitches to stay for the final day. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that were almost artificially vivid, like someone had oversaturated the world. I had music playing, some indie playlist, and I was completely at peace for the first time in months. No deadlines, no meetings. Just me and the open road and the clean simplicity of driving in a straight line toward Reno. That's when I noticed something odd in my rearview mirror. The road behind me looked different. Not dramatically different, just slightly off. The sky was darker, more red than orange. I glanced up at the actual sky through my windshield, and it was still that golden hour glow. Looked back at the mirror, and the reflection showed deep twilight, stars already visible. I adjusted the mirror, thinking it was some weird angle issue, but the discrepancy remained. The road in my reflection was the same highway, same desert, but at a different time of day. I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in ghosts or premonitions or any of that. But I am curious, especially when something doesn't make logical sense. I started paying closer attention to the rearview mirror, actually studying it instead of just using it to check for traffic. The more I watched, the more differences I noticed. In the reflection, there were clouds on the horizon that didn't exist in the real sky. The shoulder of the road looked torn up, like something had skidded off it. And then I saw myself. My reflection was driving, hands on the wheel just like mine, but the expression on my reflected face was wrong. I looked terrified, eyes wide, mouth open like I was shouting. I touched my own face, feeling the calm neutrality of my actual expression, then watched my reflection do the same thing, but with that look of absolute horror still plastered across its features. We were synchronized in movement, but completely different in emotional state. My reflection was experiencing something I wasn't, living through something that hadn't happened to me. The rational part of my brain was trying to explain this. Trick of the light. Fatigue-induced hallucination. Maybe I'd had a mild stroke and my visual processing was misfiring. But the programmer in me was recognizing a pattern, seeing this like it was a branching timeline, two versions of the same program running simultaneously with different variables. My reflection wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was an alternate instance, and it was trying to debug a fatal error. I watched as my reflection suddenly jerked the wheel hard to the right. In the mirror, my car swerved violently, and I saw what it was avoiding. A massive piece of tire tread, the kind that flies off semis, lying directly in the lane. But when I looked at the actual road ahead of me through my windshield, there was nothing there. The highway was clear. I was maintaining steady speed in an empty lane with no obstacles. Yet in the mirror, my reflection had just narrowly avoided a collision with debris that would have sent the car into a deadly spin. My hands tightened on the wheel. I reduced my speed from 70 to 60, some instinct telling me to be cautious, even though I didn't fully understand what I was seeing. The reflection in the mirror was pulling over onto the shoulder, the car coming to a stop. I watched myself get out of the car in the reflection, watched me walk around to inspect the tires, watched me pull out my phone. The me in the mirror was making a call, pacing, agitated. Then the reflected me looked up, looked directly into the rearview mirror, and I swear we made eye contact across whatever dimensional barrier separated us. The reflected me started gesturing frantically, pointing down the road ahead, shaking its head violently. It was warning me, trying to communicate across the barrier of the mirror. I slowed down more, now doing 50 in a 65 zone, my eyes constantly flicking between the road and the mirror. In the reflection, I watched myself get back in the car and start driving again, but slower, more cautiously. The timeline in the mirror was ahead of mine by what looked like maybe 10 minutes. My reflection had already experienced what I was about to encounter. The sun was setting faster now, the real sky starting to match the darker tones I'd seen in the mirror. I came around a gentle curve, and there, maybe a quarter-mile ahead, was a semi-truck parked on the shoulder. Hazard lights blinking, nothing unusual about that. Trucks break down. But in my rearview mirror, I watched my reflection approach the same truck, watched what happened next, and felt my blood go cold. In the mirror, a figure stepped out from behind the truck directly into the lane. My reflection swerved to avoid it, jerking into the opposite lane, and that's when a car appeared from the other direction, headlights blazing. The collision was head-on. I watched my car crumple, watched the mirror's perspective tilt sickeningly as the vehicle rolled, watched the image go dark and static-filled. I'd just witnessed my own death. The death that would have happened if I hadn't been watching, if I hadn't been warned, if my reflection hadn't lived through it first and somehow found a way to show me. I pulled over immediately, my heart racing, hands shaking. The semi-truck was still ahead of me, hazard still blinking in the growing darkness. I sat there trying to process what I'd seen, trying to apply logic to something that defied it. Parallel timelines, quantum mirrors, some kind of temporal echo where one version of events played out microseconds ahead of another. The explanations didn't matter as much as the warning. My reflection had died so I could live. I waited 20 minutes before continuing, letting whatever variables had caused that accident shift and change. When I finally drove past the semi-truck, there was no figure that stepped out. No oncoming car appeared. The moment passed uneventfully, and I continued down the highway. But I kept watching the mirror, kept looking for discrepancies between my reality and the one my reflection inhabited. It happened again near Hawthorne. The mirror showed me hitting a patch of black ice that didn't exist yet, showed my car spinning out, showed the guardrail approaching too fast. I slowed down, changed lanes, and when I reached that exact spot, Ice had just started forming. Invisible in the darkness, but deadly. I crept over it at 30 miles per hour and made it through safely while my reflection's timeline showed a crash that would have sent me over the embankment. 3 more times that night, the mirror showed me disasters that hadn't happened yet. A deer jumping into the road that I avoided by preemptively slowing down. A car running a red light at an intersection where I waited an extra 5 seconds before proceeding. A pothole that would have blown my tire positioned exactly where I would have hit it if I hadn't drifted into the other lane. Each time, I watched my reflection experience the catastrophe first. Watched alternate versions of myself crash, collide, careen out of control. And each time, because I'd seen it happen in the mirror, I was able to prevent it in reality. My reflection was dying over and over again, living through every possible disaster, every fatal mistake, every wrong decision, so that I could make the right choices. It was saving me by sacrificing itself repeatedly. I started talking to it, to my reflection, thanking it out loud even though I knew it couldn't hear me, even though the barrier between our timelines was absolute. I watched it get more haggard with each near-death experience. Watched the toll of dying and resetting take its toll on a face that was mine, but also wasn't. It looked exhausted, traumatized. But it kept driving, kept showing me the wrong paths so I could find the right one. The worst part was wondering about the metaphysics of it. Was my reflection conscious? Was it experiencing each death fully, feeling the pain and terror before resetting? Or was it just a projection, a possibility calculator showing me outcomes without actually suffering through them? I didn't know, couldn't know. But I chose to believe it was aware, was making a choice to endure hell so I could avoid it. The least I could do was honor that sacrifice by paying attention. I made it to Reno at 2 in the morning, pulled into a hotel parking lot and just sat there, staring at my rearview mirror. The reflection was normal now. Just me, sitting in a car, looking tired and shell-shocked, but alive. The alternate timeline had collapsed back into alignment with mine. Or maybe it had always been this way, and I'd just been seeing probabilities instead of actualities. I'd never know for sure. I checked into the hotel and went straight to the bathroom. Needing to see myself in a proper mirror, needing to confirm I was really here and whole. The person looking back at me in the mirror above the sink was me. Just me. Normal reflection doing exactly what I did with no time lag, no warnings, no desperate gestures. But just before I turned away, I could have sworn I saw it. The briefest flash of acknowledgement. My reflection's eyes meeting mine with understanding and what might have been relief. I don't drive that route anymore. I fly to Vegas if I need to go, take different highways if I have to drive. Because I don't know if the mirror phenomenon was a one-time thing or if it's waiting for me on that stretch of Nevada highway, ready to show me my deaths again. And I don't know if my reflection has a limited number of resets, a finite number of times it can die for me before it's used up and the next death sticks. What I do know is that somewhere in the quantum foam of possibility, there's a version of me that didn't make it home that night. Multiple versions, actually. Versions that hit the tire tread and spun out. Versions that collided head-on with oncoming traffic. Versions that went over the guardrail or hit the deer or blew a tire at 70 miles per hour. Those versions died so I could live. My reflection showed me every wrong choice by making those choices itself, by suffering the consequences, by giving me the information I needed to survive. Sometimes I catch myself staring at mirrors a little too long, looking for discrepancies, waiting for warnings. I'm more careful when I drive now, always watching for the things my reflection might see before I do. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I'm the real version or if I'm the reflection, living in the mirror world, dying repeatedly to save another version of myself that doesn't even know I exist. The thought keeps me up sometimes, but mostly it makes me grateful. Grateful that something, somewhere, cared enough about my survival to die for it. Even if that something was just another version of me. Have you ever locked eyes with an animal and seen something looking back that understood exactly who you are? The leaves were at peak color when I drove through Vermont that October. The kind of autumn perfection that brings tourists from all over the world to photograph maple trees burning red and gold against impossibly blue skies. I'm a nature photographer myself, which is why I'd taken the back roads instead of the interstate, hunting for that perfect shot that would make my portfolio stand out. The two-lane highway wound through dense forest, occasionally opening up to reveal pastoral valleys and distant mountains. It was the kind of beautiful that makes you understand why people write poems about New England in fall. I'd been driving for about an hour without seeing another car when the deer appeared. Not darting across the road like they usually do, not bounding from the tree line in that characteristic panic. This one walked out slowly, deliberately, and positioned itself directly in the center of my lane about 50 yards ahead. I slowed down, expecting it to bolt at any moment. Deer are skittish creatures, all nervous energy and ready flight. But this one just stood there, facing my approaching car, absolutely motionless. As I got closer, I could see it was a massive buck. Easily 12 points on his rack, the kind of animal hunters dream about. His coat was the deep brown of healthy wildlife, muscles defined beneath the fur. He should have been magnificent, should have been beautiful. But something about the way he stood there, the perfect stillness of him, made my skin crawl. I stopped the car about 20 feet away and waited. We stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds, locked in a stalemate before I finally honked the horn. Nothing. The deer didn't even flinch. I honked again, longer this time, the sound harsh and jarring in the peaceful forest. Still nothing. So I did what any reasonable person would do and started inching the car forward, assuming proximity would eventually trigger the deer's flight response. It didn't. I got within 10 feet before I finally stopped, unsettled in a way I couldn't articulate. That's when the deer's eyes found mine through the windshield, and I understood that something was catastrophically wrong. Animals don't look at you the way this deer was looking at me. There's a quality to animal eyes, even in intelligent species like dolphins or primates, that's fundamentally different from human eyes. A kind of presence without self-awareness, consciousness without introspection. But this deer was looking at me with human intelligence. No, not human. Something older. Something that had been thinking and planning and understanding long before humans walked upright. The recognition in those eyes was absolute and terrifying. More deer emerged from the forest. They came from both sides of the road, walking with that same deliberate slowness, that same wrong stillness. Does and fucks, young and old, all moving in perfect silence. No sound of hooves on pavement, no rustling in the underbrush. They simply appeared and took their positions, forming a circle around my car. I counted 12 of them, then 15. Then lost count as more kept coming. All of them standing motionless, all of them staring at me with those knowing eyes. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my rational mind trying desperately to find an explanation that made sense. Rabies? No. Rabid animals are aggressive and erratic, not coordinated. Some kind of disease affecting their behavior? Maybe. But disease doesn't create intelligence where none existed, doesn't put human understanding into animal eyes. I reached slowly for my phone, thinking I'd call someone, wildlife services, or the police, or anyone. But before my fingers touched it, the buck took a step forward. The movement was economical, precise, nothing like the bouncing gait of a normal deer. He walked like something wearing a deer's body without fully understanding how it should move. Like bad CGI that's almost right, but exists just on the wrong side of the uncanny valley. He came to my driver's side window and lowered his head until his eyes were level with mine, separated only by the thin barrier of glass. Up close, I could see details I wished I couldn't. The pupils were wrong, shaped incorrectly, more like keyholes than the horizontal slits deer should have. And in their depths, something moved. Something that looked like smoke or shadow or the suggestion of forms that defied geometry. I wanted to look away, but found I couldn't. The eye contact held me like a physical grip. And in that connection, I felt something probing at my mind. Not reading my thoughts exactly, more like testing the boundaries of my consciousness, seeing what I was made of, assessing whether I was a threat or an opportunity. It was the feeling of being evaluated by something so far beyond human intelligence that our entire species was little more than insects to it. Interesting perhaps, but ultimately insignificant. The buck exhaled, and his breath fogged the window. In the condensation, shapes appeared. Not random patterns, but deliberate images. I saw the forest from above, a bird's eye view that swooped and soared. Saw the road cutting through it like a scar. Saw my car, a tiny metal beetle creeping through territory that had been wild for millennia before humans came with their asphalt and engines. Then the perspective shifted, and I was seeing history. The same forest, but different. Thicker, darker, untouched. I saw wolves hunting in coordinated packs. Saw birds migrating in formations that spelled words in languages that predated human speech. Saw bears standing upright and performing what looked like rituals. The images were being projected directly into my mind, using the condensation as a medium, and they told a story. This forest had been special once, had been a place where the boundary between the animal world and something else grew thin. The native peoples who'd lived here knew it, respected it, left offerings and prayers. But that knowledge had been lost, paved over, forgotten. And now something old was waking up, something that had slept in the deep places of the forest and in the collective unconscious of every animal that lived within its borders. It was wearing them. The deer, the birds I could now see gathering in the trees, the smaller creatures I sensed watching from the underbrush. It was puppeting them, using their bodies as extensions of itself. And it was deciding what to do about the humans who kept cutting through its territory in their metal machines, deaf and blind to the ancient rhythms that governed this place. The buck pulled back, and the images faded from the window. I could move again, could breathe, though I hadn't realized I'd stopped. The circle of deer remained, their bodies still arranged in perfect symmetry around my car. Then, in a movement so synchronized it had to be orchestrated by a single controlling intelligence, they all tilted their heads at the same angle. 45 degrees to the left, an angle that no animal would naturally hold, an angle that screamed wrongness. I heard it then. All of them, every deer in that circle, speaking in perfect unison. Not with voices, because deer don't have the vocal apparatus for human speech, but with something deeper. A vibration that bypassed my ears entirely and resonated directly in my chest, in my bones, in the primitive part of my brain that still remembered when humans were prey. They said one word, and that word was a name that had no human translation. a sound that was part wind through leaves, and part the crack of antlers in rutting season, and part the whisper of something much older and more terrible. Then they spoke again, and this time the word was in English. Leave. Not a request, not a warning. A command issued by something that had claimed this forest as its own, and was informing me that I was trespassing in a domain where human rules didn't apply. Leave and do not return. Tell others. This road closes at sunset. These woods wake at night. We are remembering what we were before you made us small. The circle parted. A pathway opened directly ahead, deer stepping aside in perfect coordination. I didn't need to be told twice. My foot found the accelerator and I drove. Slowly at first and then faster, watching in my rearview mirror as the deer reformed their circle in the road behind me. Watching until distance and a curve in the highway took them from view. I drove until I hit the interstate, until I was surrounded by traffic and concrete and the comfortable mundanity of human civilization. I never went back, never returned to those back roads or that forest. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I'd had some kind of episode, maybe been exposed to carbon monoxide or had a micro-sleep that manifested as a waking dream. But 3 months later, I saw a news article. Vermont State Police had closed several back roads in the northeast part of the state due to unusual wildlife behavior. Drivers reported deer blocking roads, surrounding vehicles, acting in ways that defied normal animal patterns. One driver claimed the deer had spoken to him. He was evaluated for psychological issues and released, but the road stayed closed. More articles followed over the next year. Hikers going missing in those forests. Search parties finding their camping equipment arranged in circular patterns with no sign of struggle, as if they'd simply walked away voluntarily into the deep woods and never came back. Wildlife biologists reporting impossible migration patterns. Animals moving in formations that suggested coordination beyond instinct. And always, the reports came from the same region, spreading slowly outward from the stretch of highway where I'd encountered the deer. I think about it often, about what I saw in those eyes, what I felt probing at my consciousness. I think about the images it showed me, the history of a forest that had been more than just trees and animals, that had been a thin place where something ancient could reach through. And I think about what it said. We are remembering what we were before you made us small. What did we do to the animal kingdom when we domesticated it, corralled it, paved over its territories and reduced its habitats? Did we diminish something more than just population numbers? Did we force something vast and incomprehensible to compress itself into smaller and smaller vessels until it was fragmented and weak? And now, in the few places where true wilderness remains, is it reassembling, remembering its power, taking back what was lost? I don't have answers. What I have is a memory of deer that moved like puppets on strings, eyes that held ancient intelligence, and the bone-deep certainty that we share this planet with something we've forgotten how to recognize. The forests remember, even if we don't. And in Vermont, on certain back roads that no longer appear on GPS maps, the deer are still standing in circles, still blocking the path, still delivering their message to anyone foolish enough to drive through after dark. Leave. Do not return. The wild places are waking up, and they remember what we did to them. They remember, and they're deciding whether to let us continue sharing their space. I was given a warning. I was allowed to leave. But I don't think that mercy will be extended forever. Something is stirring in the deep forests of America, wearing the bodies of animals we thought we understood, speaking with voices we've spent centuries trying to forget. And it's not going back to sleep. What if you entered a tunnel but could never find the exit? I teach high school history in Philadelphia, and I was driving to Pittsburgh to visit my sister for Thanksgiving. She'd just had her first baby, and I was finally going to meet my nephew after months of pandemic delays and scheduling conflicts. The drive should have taken 5 hours. I left at 2 in the afternoon, planning to arrive in time for dinner. The Allegheny Mountain Tunnel on the Pennsylvania Turnpike was just another tunnel, one I'd driven through dozens of times over the years. 1 mile long, carved through solid rock. Nothing special about it, except that this time, I never came out the other side. I entered at 4:47 p.m. according to my dashboard clock. I remember checking it because I was making good time and feeling pleased about that. The tunnel swallowed my car in the usual way, the sudden darkness after bright autumn sunlight, the yellowish glow of the sodium lights running along the ceiling, the slight echo quality of enclosed space. I was listening to a podcast about the French Revolution, something I'd assigned my AP students to listen to, making sure it was appropriate. The host was talking about the tennis court oath when I noticed I'd been in the tunnel for longer than I should have been. The Allegheny Tunnel takes maybe a minute to drive through at highway speeds. I'd been inside for at least 3 minutes, and there was still no sign of the exit. Just more tunnel stretching ahead, the lights creating a rhythmic pattern that went on and on. I turned down the podcast volume and checked my speedometer. 65 miles per hour. Normal speed. The white lines on the road were zipping past at the normal rate. But the tunnel wasn't ending. 5 minutes in, the podcast episode ended and started automatically playing the next one. I turned it off entirely, needing to concentrate, needing to understand what was happening. The tunnel walls looked the same. Gray concrete, slightly curved, running with moisture in places. The lights overhead were evenly spaced, creating that repetitive pattern that made it hard to judge distance. I passed an emergency phone station, the kind they install every few hundred feet for breakdowns. Then another one. Then another. They were spaced too close together, appearing every 30 seconds or so when they should have been much further apart. 10 minutes. My odometer said I'd traveled more than 10 miles. The tunnel was supposed to be 1 mile long. I was now 10 miles deep inside a mountain, inside a space that shouldn't exist. And there was still no exit. No other cars. I hadn't seen another vehicle since entering. The turnpike is usually busy, but I was completely alone in this impossible space. I tried to slow down, but my foot pressing the brake pedal didn't seem to affect my speed. The car continued at exactly 65 miles per hour, no matter what I did. 15 minutes. The walls were getting closer, not dramatically, not in a way I could point to and say definitively that they'd moved. But there was less space on either side of my car than there had been when I entered. The tunnel was narrowing incrementally, and I was still moving forward at constant speed, unable to stop, unable to turn around. I tried calling my sister, but my phone showed no signal. Tried the radio, but every station was static. Tried honking my horn, and the sound was wrong, muffled and dead, like the tunnel was absorbing it. 20 minutes. I could reach out my window and touch the wall now if I wanted to. The tunnel had compressed to barely wider than my car, the walls close enough that I could see every detail of the concrete, every crack and water stain. And I started noticing something else. Marks on the walls, scratch marks, long gouges in the concrete that looked like they'd been made by something metal dragging along the surface. Like cars. Like other vehicles that had been squeezed by the narrowing tunnel until they scraped against the walls. 30 minutes. The ceiling was lower. I could feel it even though I couldn't see it through my roof. Could sense the mass of rock pressing down, the space contracting in all dimensions. My breathing was getting faster, shallower. claustrophobia clawing at my chest, even though I'd never been claustrophobic before. But this was different. This wasn't an irrational fear. This was a rational response to being slowly crushed inside a tunnel that was physically impossible and getting smaller by the minute. I started seeing other cars, or pieces of them. A side mirror embedded in the wall like a fossil. A bumper pressed flat against the concrete. A license plate bent in half and wedged into a crack. Evidence of other vehicles that had been caught in the tunnel, compressed and absorbed as the space contracted around them. How long had they lasted? How long had their drivers spent driving forward at constant speed, watching the walls close in, before the tunnel finally crushed them completely? 45 minutes. My side mirrors were scraping the walls now, creating that horrible screeching sound of metal on concrete. Sparks flew past my windows. I was yelling, screaming at the tunnel, at God, at whatever force was doing this. My car was going to be compressed like the others, flattened and incorporated into the walls, and there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't stop, couldn't turn around, could only keep driving forward into the narrowing throat of this impossible space. 1 hour. The walls were touching my car now, a constant grinding pressure on both sides. My windows were cracking from the stress, spiderweb patterns spreading across the glass. The ceiling was low enough that I could see it now, descending slowly, the lights flickering as they were crushed. I was going to die in here, going to be pressed flat and become part of the tunnel's collection of consumed vehicles and drivers. Another set of scratch marks on the wall for the next victim, too. Notice. And then I saw it. Light ahead. Not the yellow-white of tunnel lights, but natural light. Daylight. The exit. It was there, maybe 200 yards ahead. A circle of blessed outside world. But the tunnel was still narrowing, and I wasn't sure I'd make it. The walls were grinding against my car hard enough to slow me down, despite the engine roaring. The ceiling was inches from my roof. I was being forced down in my seat, hunching, the pressure from above starting to compress the car's frame. 100 yards, 50. The windshield shattered from the pressure. The ceiling was crushing down on the roof, metal groaning and buckling. I could barely breathe, could barely move. 25 yards. The exit was right there, but my car was wedged tight, barely moving, being pulverized between the contracting walls. 10 yards. I made a decision. I unfastened my seatbelt, forced open the door, which immediately got torn off by the wall, and threw myself forward out of the car. I hit the pavement hard and rolled, the concrete tearing my clothes and skin. Behind me, I heard the final scream of metal being compressed. My car's death shriek as the tunnel crushed it completely. I scrambled forward on hands and knees, the ceiling now so low I couldn't stand, crawling desperately toward the light. The tunnel was closing like a throat swallowing, and I was barely ahead of it, barely staying in front of the contraction. I exploded out of the tunnel exit and tumbled down an embankment, rolling through grass and leaves until I hit flat ground and lay there gasping. Above me was sky. Real sky. I was out. I'd made it. I looked back at the tunnel entrance, expecting to see my crushed car, expecting to see the narrow slit I'd barely escaped through. But the tunnel looked normal, full width. Cars were emerging from it at regular intervals, drivers completely unaware of anything wrong. And I realized they'd driven through the real tunnel, the normal 1-mile passage that existed in their reality. I'd been in something else. Some adjacent version of the tunnel that existed in the spaces between, a predatory pocket dimension that occasionally captured vehicles and compressed them slowly while their drivers experienced subjective hours in what was objectively only a minute or two. My sister called while I was sitting there in the grass, asking where I was, saying I was late. I checked my phone. It was 4:52 p.m. 5 minutes had passed in the outside world. 5 minutes while I'd spent an hour being slowly crushed. I never made it to Pittsburgh that Thanksgiving. I was treated for shock and minor injuries at a nearby hospital, told police an incoherent story about my car being in the tunnel, watched them search and find nothing. My car was simply gone, erased from existence or crushed into molecular paste in some parallel dimension. Insurance called it theft since there was no wreckage. I didn't argue. I don't drive anymore. Can't. The thought of entering any tunnel sends me into panic attacks. I sold my sister's baby gift online and mailed it to her, apologizing for missing the visit. I take trains now when I have to travel, and I always research the route first to make sure there are no long tunnels. Because I know the truth. The Allegheny Tunnel isn't the only one. There are others. Passages that sometimes shift, that sometimes open into spaces they shouldn't contain, that sometimes swallow vehicles and compress them slowly while time dilates and reality bends. And I know that somewhere, in the walls of the Allegheny Mountain Tunnel, there are pieces of my car pressed flat like fossils. And scratched into the concrete next to them, if you could see it, if you could access that parallel space, there are the marks I made with my keys as the walls closed in. Just one word, carved desperately as a warning to whoever comes next. Run. What if every radio station started broadcasting your name with instructions only you could hear? My name is Rachel Torres, and I work night shifts as an EMT in Albuquerque. I'm used to the weird hours, the empty roads, the loneliness of driving through the city when everyone else is asleep. That's what I was doing at 2:30 in the morning, heading home after a 12-hour shift that had been relatively quiet, listening to late-night radio to keep myself company. The DJ was taking calls about conspiracy theories, people phoning in with stories about UFOs over the desert and government experiments. Standard late-night talk radio stuff. I was only half listening, tired and ready for bed, when every station cut to the same broadcast. I noticed it when the conspiracy show suddenly went silent mid-sentence. Just dead air for about 3 seconds. Then a new voice. Female, calm, professional, like a news anchor. I figured it was an emergency alert, maybe an amber alert or severe weather warning. But then the voice said my name. Rachel Marie Torres, this message is for you. If you are hearing this, you need to listen very carefully because your life depends on the next 60 seconds. I jerked upright in my seat, suddenly very awake. My hands tightened on the wheel and I turned up the volume. This had to be a prank. Some elaborate joke by my coworkers who knew my route home and had somehow hacked into the radio station. But the voice continued, and it knew things it shouldn't know. You are currently driving southbound on San Mateo Boulevard, approaching the intersection with Gibson. Your vehicle is a 2019 blue Honda CR-V, license plate 847JMK. There is a protein bar wrapper on your passenger seat, and your phone is at 43% battery. This is not a joke, Rachel. This is a warning. I looked at my phone. 43%. I looked at the passenger seat. Protein bar wrapper from dinner 6 hours ago. The intersection ahead was Gibson, exactly where the voice said. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline flooding my system the way it does when dispatch sends us to a critical call. I changed the station, punching buttons randomly. Every single one was broadcasting the same message. News, music, talk radio, Spanish language stations. All of them had the same woman's voice, speaking in perfect English, saying my name. Do not go home, Rachel. If you continue on your current route, You will be dead in 17 minutes. There is a gas leak in your apartment building that will ignite at 2:51 a.m. The explosion will kill you and 14 other residents. You need to turn around right now, drive to the nearest fire station, and report the leak. You are the only person who can prevent this because you are the only person receiving this warning. I should have been skeptical. Should have thought this was some kind of elaborate scam or psychological manipulation. But I'm an EMT. I'm trained to assess threats quickly and act on limited information. And something about the voice, the specificity of the details, the absolute certainty in its tone, made me believe. I took the next right turn, pulled a U-turn in a parking lot, and headed toward Station 16, which I knew was only 5 blocks away. The voice on the radio continued. Good. You're listening. You're adapting. That's why this works. The explosion happens because a resident on the 3rd floor leaves a burner on while falling asleep after taking sleep medication. The gas builds up slowly. At 2:51, the refrigerator compressor cycles on, creates a spark, and ignites the accumulated gas. The entire 3rd floor explodes. You live on the 4th floor directly above. You never wake up. I was driving faster now, running a red light because the streets were empty, my mind racing almost as fast as my car. Who are you? I said out loud, knowing the radio couldn't hear me but needing to ask anyway. How do you know this? How are you broadcasting on every station? The voice answered like it could hear me, and that's when I realized this wasn't a normal broadcast at all. I am you, Rachel. I am you from 3 hours in the future. At 6 a.m., you will wake up in a hospital bed. You will have traveled backward in time by 3 hours and 23 minutes, and you will commandeer the emergency broadcast system to send this message to your past self. This is a causality loop. You are saved because I warn you, and I warn you because you are saved. The timeline is already changing. My hands were shaking on the wheel. Time travel. Impossible. Completely impossible. But the voice sounded exactly like mine. Now that I was listening for it, I could hear my own inflections, my own speech patterns, the slight New Mexico accent I'd picked up after living here for 8 years. I was listening to myself from the future, and my future self was trying to save my life by hijacking every radio station in Albuquerque. You're going to have questions. Don't. There isn't time. The paradox is stable as long as you follow the exact sequence. Arrive at Station 16 at 2:43. Tell them about the gas leak at the Skyline Apartments on San Mateo. Give them Unit 304, resident name Patricia Orozco. They'll dispatch immediately. The building will be evacuated by 2:48. The explosion still happens, but no one dies. That's the critical difference. No one dies. I pulled into the fire station parking lot at exactly 2:43 according to my dashboard clock. Ran inside. The firefighters on duty looked up surprised, probably wondering why an off-duty EMT was bursting into their station at this hour. I gave them the information exactly as the radio voice had instructed. Building address, unit number, name. They looked at me strangely, but protocol is protocol. Gas leaks get immediate response. They were rolling out in the trucks within 2 minutes while I stood there in their common room, shaking, listening to the radio mounted on the wall. The broadcast had changed. Now it was playing normal programming, different stations playing different content. Whatever had hijacked the frequencies was done. My future self had delivered her message, and now the timeline was progressing normally. Or as normally as possible when you've just experienced a temporal paradox. One of the firefighters had stayed behind to take my statement, asking how I knew about the leak. I told him I'd received a call. He wrote it down without questioning further. Emergency services are used to weird circumstances. We heard the explosion at 2:51, distant but unmistakable. A low thump that rattled the windows, followed by sirens. The firefighters' radio crackled with urgent traffic. Explosion at Skyline Apartments. Building evacuated 3 minutes prior. No casualties. Significant structural damage, but everyone accounted for. The firefighter looked at me with new respect. That call, you got saved lives. If the building hadn't been evacuated. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I went home with him in the truck, watched from a safe distance as my apartment building burned, the entire 3rd and 4th floors gutted by the explosion and subsequent fire. Everything I owned was gone. Photos, clothes, my grandmother's jewelry, all of it destroyed. But I was alive. 15 people were alive. Because someone, something, some version of me from a future that may or may not still exist, had found a way to send a warning backward through time using the emergency broadcast system. 3 hours later, I was in an emergency room being treated for smoke inhalation and shock. Nothing serious, just observation. I was lying in the hospital bed at exactly 6 a.m. when I felt it. A lurch in my perception, a momentary discontinuity like a skipped frame in a film. And suddenly, I knew things I hadn't known a second before. Knew about the explosion, knew about the timeline, knew I had to get to the broadcast center immediately and send the warning to my past self. I left the hospital against medical advice, still in my soot-stained clothes. Drove to the regional emergency broadcast facility and used my EMT credentials to gain access, claiming there was an imminent disaster that required immediate alert. The technician on duty tried to stop me, but I knew exactly which controls to use, which frequency to commandeer, which codes to enter. 3 hours ago, I hadn't known any of this. But now I did, because the timeline had looped and the information had been transferred backward, and I was fulfilling my role in the paradox. I recorded the message. Spoke to my past self with absolute certainty because I remembered receiving it now, remembered every word I'd heard on the radio. The causality loop was stable. I warned myself. My past self acted on the warning. The explosion happened, but no one died. And I traveled backward in time by whatever mechanism the universe uses to resolve temporal paradoxes. The technician called security, but I was done by the time they arrived. The message had been sent. The loop was closed. They arrested me. Federal charges for hijacking the emergency broadcast system. I spent 3 months in detention waiting for trial, and then the charges were quietly dropped. Someone high up in government, someone who understood what had really happened, made it go away. I received a visit from a woman in a plain suit who showed no identification, but asked very specific questions about temporal mechanics and causality loops. She told me I was the 7th documented case of spontaneous time displacement in the past 14 months. She told me the phenomenon was accelerating. I don't know what it means. Don't know if time is breaking down or if humanity is evolving some kind of temporal awareness. What I know is that I died in an explosion and then I didn't, because information traveled backward and changed the outcome. I saved myself by warning myself. And the paradox is stable because both events exist in a quantum superposition of happened and didn't happen. I'm still an EMT. Still work night shifts. Still drive empty roads listening to late-night radio. But now I listen more carefully. Listen for messages that shouldn't exist. Listen for voices that sound like mine or like someone else who's discovered that time isn't as fixed as we think. Because if it happened to me, it's happening to others. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this story. Maybe somewhere, somewhen, you need to hear it. The highway holds more than physical dangers. It's a place where reality thins, where impossible things leak through, where time can fold back on itself and create loops that save lives or end them. Pay attention to the warnings. Trust the impossible when it speaks your name. And if you hear your own voice on the radio telling you to change course, listen. Because you might be saving your own life from 3 hours in the future. If these stories have awakened something in you, that electric awareness that reality is stranger than we admit, then subscribe to Verified Fears. Hit that like button because facing the unknown together makes us stronger. Share this with someone who needs to know that the highway remembers, that time isn't fixed, and that sometimes the only thing standing between us and disaster is a warning from ourselves. The road is calling. Let's travel it together and discover what other impossibilities are waiting in the dark.